We have had quite the week, and we are gearing up for Monday. So with that, I would like to call the April 16th Budget Committee meeting to order at 3:05 p.m. And with that, we'll start with opening procedures, which is please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I would like to read the land acknowledgement. Please give me just 1 second to get that. We recognize that we are presently on the lands of the Chochenyo, Muecma, Karkin, Ohlone peoples, and acknowledge them as the first inhabitants of the land which we currently occupy. Just clear out some screens, I apologize. And we will begin with roll call.
Trustee Reckler.
That would be me, I'm here.
And Trustee Phillips is not yet present.
Okay. And then we have some introductions. Would you be able to introduce our
I
guests? Welcome.
can, absolutely. So we have quite a few folks on screen, and I have one more to bring up there. And then we've got some hidden behind screen too for the next one. So with us today, we have from our underwriters, Tyler Old and Juan Fernandez from JP Morgan Chase, Randy Merritt from Raymond James and Associates. We also have Blake Boehm, our financial advisor from KNN. And then our facilities team is all here with us as well. So you have Melissa Payne, Louis Fries, Sanja, Ellen is also with us. Sitting hidden also behind that'll be coming up in a little bit, Margarita Romo, our lead internal auditor, is in the background, so is Regina Weber. And then we have our audit team from Christy White that I've got sort of hidden as well. That'll come back, Michael Ash and Monique Manzo, that'll be presenting on the back half of this.
Wow, okay, well, hello and welcome to everybody, and thank you for being here. It's like, that's amazing. Yeah, as I keep saying, this is one of my favorite parts of the pandemic, is just being able to access all this mind talent virtually. I never want to give this up, so this is something I really want to carry forward. So welcome, and terrific to see you all here, and I'm really looking forward to today's meeting. I would, before we go forward though, I do want to just briefly go through and, all right, so we're done with that. We can move on to approval of the agenda. And my question is, are we doing item 3, which is the MRAD and the OPEB?
We're not really planning to present on them. It was more just that these are standard reports we do yearly. We place them here so that if there is time and you want to talk about them after the audits, we certainly can. Otherwise, it was just so that you had received them before we bring them to the board to be accepted.
Okay, and so how much time do we want to put on each of these items?
So I had planned to do an hour and an hour, so a little less, but basically this first topic I think will take an hour to go through all of the bond financing.
Okay, so when we get to 3, we're probably going to table that, is the expectation, correct?
Yeah, it was really just to receive. It was not planned.
Oh, it's receive. You weren't even going to want to. Okay, so you weren't.
Correct.
Discuss those in any way. Okay. All right. Well, for our learning, I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea to go through MRAD and OPEB at some point. 2 of my favorite acronyms, but all right, as it is. Okay, so then we'll put an hour on each, or roughly an hour on each. 4:10. Right, so 4:10. One of them needs to get cut because we're done at 5 o'clock. So it's
right. So the audit won't take a full hour.
Okay.
It may be more like an hour 10 and 40 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, we are done at 5. That's it.
Yep.
Okay, well then I can't vote to approve the agenda, but it is what it is. I looked at the minutes. The 5th and the 19th are approved. They're all seem fine to me. I think we'll probably have to bring them back next time so that
we will.
Okay, so, and then also we never
Oh,
did,
no, we won't. We have our second trustee.
okay, fantastic. Hello to, good afternoon to President Phillips.
Hi, I'm really here. I'm just trying to get the video on.
No
Good
problem.
afternoon.
Would you be able to approve, did you read the minutes and would you be able to approve them? Or do we need to give you a minute?
Minutes approved.
Okay,
Vote
great.
yes.
So, okay, and I do too. So those two are approved. We do need to come back, just a note from Ms. Vega, we do need to come back with January. I don't believe that was ever done.
Okay, we will do that.
Okay, and then, all right, we'll move on to D, public comment. 20 minutes, 3 minutes each, and I have my timer. Do you have a virtual clock?
We do. if
Okay,
we
good.
need, but we don't have any hands up, so
Okay,
we're okay on that aspect.
okay, then we can move on to item 2A, bond financing.
So let me get this presentation set up here so that we can see it. There we go. So can you see the bond program overview?
Mhm.
I am very pleased to continue the trend for the budget committee where we bring in outside experts so that you don't have to hear me the whole time. I'm going to try to keep that as a long-term pattern as much as possible. And I'm extremely pleased to have the folks from Raymond James, JP Morgan, and K&N with us. Our goal today is to really take you all the way through everything you needed to know and about 15 things you didn't really want to know about bond financing, from what's happening in the market, how do we monitor when we should refinance based on our board policy, a summary of all the different issuances that we've done, a very likely refunding opportunity that we would like to get guidance from this subcommittee, then how
The
we
answer
do
is
bond,
yes.
yeah, how we do bond ratings and what ratings mean and what decisions we do as it pertains to the district's finances play into that. The connection to the assessed value and property values, and then what might be possibilities for Measure R as we move forward. So there's a lot in this. We're real excited to present over the next hour and really answer all of your questions as we go forward. So with that, I am going to move first off to a municipal market update. And this is going to be from, I'm not sure, Juan, are you going to start us off?
Yes, that's me.
Perfect. So Juan Fernandez from JP Morgan Chase, and you'll just tell me next slides.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Wold, and President Phillip and Trustee Reckler. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present to you today. I've had the honor of being the district underwriter for almost 4 years now. So it's, I appreciate again the opportunity to do this. My job today is just to give you an overview of the municipal market and where we are with interest rates today. So this diagram on this slide, it just shows you, like any other market, the municipal bond market is impacted by various factors. Our market in the economy, obviously if the economy is doing well, typically interest rates are higher. If the economy is doing poorly, interest rates are lower. Everything else being equal. The Federal Reserve policy obviously also impacts the market. Right now, as you know, the Fed has a basically zero interest rate policy, so it's keeping our market very low, especially on the short end of the yield curve, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later. Supply, again, supply and demand, like any other market, the more supply, and by supply we mean the amount of bonds that municipalities are issuing in the market. Typically, that also will bring rates higher. The broader market, and by that I mean the US Treasury bond market. although it's not always sort of track each other, but we do get impacted by what happens in the treasury market. And finally, credit. If investors perceive that the municipal credit overall is weak, they will demand higher interest rates than otherwise would be the case. So Dr. Wald, the next slide, please. So in this slide, and I know there's a lot of numbers and lines here, but we wanted to show you the interest rates movement over the last year, and call it 3-4 months. On the top, we have US Treasury rates. So we have, and we're showing you the 30-year US Treasury, 10-year US Treasury, and the 5-year maturity. And on the bottom, we have what we call MMD, which is the, in the municipal market, is the AAA index. So the highest quality paper that we have. So it's an index, it's not a bond, but it's an index made up of several AAA rated bonds. So the takeaway here, I think, is that number one, the municipal market rates do not always follow the US Treasury rates over time. So they do, generally there's a pattern, but for example, if you see at the beginning of the pandemic a year ago, our rates, the municipal market rates, skyrocketed. And that is because investors were nervous about in general, the economy, but also because they perceived the weakness in municipal credits, as a lot of the tax revenues that state and local governments generate were impacted by the lockdowns. Over the last few months, we have seen interest rate creep up a little bit, and that's as the economy is opening up and there's the employment picture looks healthier. We are seeing interest rates creeping up a little bit higher, but still very low.
So one question, we did a refinancing in 2020. Where
Yes.
was that on this chart?
So Dr. Wald, if you don't, if there's a slide that comes right after
That's
this
right.
one,
It's the next one.
yes. So if you don't mind, that will show it. There we go.
And then if I could also interrupt you too, though,
course.
over time though, the rates have been just like astronomically low.
Yes.
I mean, right, we're like,
That's what this slide is now.
oh, right, okay, thank you.
So
Oh,
this,
to 2000, right,
yeah.
thank you.
So here we're taking a longer view, and so I think the interesting thing here is that if you look at 2000, between 2000 and 2001, you see the blue line, which is the interest rate for the municipal tax exempt market. You see it went high, and that's at the same time that the district was looking to do a refinancing of certain of its bonds. And I have to say that I give a lot of credit to Dr. Wald and the municipal advisor Blake, because they showed a lot of patience and in sort of waiting until the market improved and before we went into market. And I mean, we were having weekly calls for over a month, and eventually we were able to capture a low in the market and get not only great interest rates for you, but savings to the taxpayers.
And that's an important piece to understand. Often we'll come to the board and say we want to refinance, and we'll get board permission, but we won't say the exact date because we might pull back and hold. And so that authorization is to go to the market, but then we do a pre-pricing call the day before the sale. And I have in the past actually said, no, we're not going to go. We're going to wait a little longer because it just doesn't look like the conditions that are favorable to us. And so that's an important piece to really understand, especially when we talk about the difference between competitive and negotiated sales.
No, I totally understand that, because I used to have to do that with the coffee futures market. So I would get cleared and we would just wait it out until, we thought it was right, and then we would go. So I 100% understand that.
And then Juan, what's probably the biggest takeaway though, if you look at the last 21 years on this chart for the market right now?
Yeah, I think when I look at this, and I was thinking about this before I joined the call, is that honestly, since the financial crisis, since if you go back over 10 years, municipal rates have remained very, very low. And over the last, year, they have remained significantly less than their average, their mean over the 20-year period. So I think the bottom line is that in today's market, it's very advantageous for municipal issuers to take advantage not only on refinancing, but also for their new money, their borrowing for new projects. So as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the things that that impacts our market and are very much more than, for example, the equities or US Treasuries is supply and demand. And one of the reasons our municipal rates are low and relatively lower than when you compare them to US Treasuries is the amount of money that continues to flow into our market. And this is measured by the amount of weekly flows into municipal bond funds. And that's, bond funds like BlackRock and T. Rowe Price, Nuveen, Franklin, so forth. And as you can see, since the beginning, since after the sort of the initial part of the pandemic, we have had a consistent flow of money into our markets. So even though supply has been a little bit elevated, that has been sort of offset by the amount of money that is available that investors want to put to work in our market. The chart on the bottom, it just compares the flows into our market, and we're the middle, I guess, teal line. Compare that to equities and compare that to just taxable fixed income funds. But again, a consistent growth in our assets. Next slide, please. So again, a very busy slide, so forgive me, but I think nobody has a crystal ball and can tell you with any certainty where interest rates are going to be when you come to market. But we do have some very smart people, economists employed at JP Morgan and at Raymond James too, I'm sure, that are paid to sort of guess where interest rates are going to be. On the left here, we have US Treasuries, and we show you the 2-year US Treasury, 5, 10, 30. And on the right is the tax-exempt municipal rates. Again, same, 2, 5, 10, 30. Now, the reason that we show you different interest rates in the yield curve is that municipal bonds are, in some ways, are very similar to a mortgage, which they're issued, say, over a 30-year period, or they amortize over a 30-year period. But unlike a mortgage, a municipal bond, in essence, is a series of bonds. So every year, there's a different bond that has a different interest rate, which is, like you say, those of us who have mortgages know that that's not the way mortgages work. But that's why we show you different maturities. I think the takeaway here is that as you look through on the x-axis here and look at third quarter, fourth quarter, or even a year from now, that we are expecting rates to increase slightly as the economy opens up and things get better for everybody, but it's not going to be significant. So I think, again, 2021 is a very good year for municipal issuers to borrow if they have to borrow. On the bottom here, I don't think there's anything here that we don't all know, but it's just sort of the factors that impact interest rates, what could drive things at rates lower and what could have interest rates increase, whether it's federal stimulus or if there's some sort of a lockdown again because there's an uptick in infections and things like that. But again, our expectation is that although interest rates will go up slightly, not significant.
And so if you understand these metrics, whenever we're doing a sale, a lot of the conversation is what are going to be the yields for different series of bonds within to create the total repayment piece. Mm-hmm. Since we start repaying the bonds immediately, we can have some series that only have a 1 or 2 year horizon that are much lower interest rates, bringing the total cost down. And as you have more authorization, you can reconfigure within. So it's really important to understand that you're not just doing a 30-year long note,
yes,
even though you're paying over the 30 years. So now we're going to switch over to what we've borrowed before. And I believe this is you, right, Blake, or is this me? I can't remember.
This is me. This is
Yeah.
me. And so unless you want to intro the section, Tony, I'm happy to.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
You know, which would
yeah.
be very helpful though? Please explain your role before you go into the presentation so that we're understanding the differences in what the various people do
Of course.
in the process.
And before I get into that, I'll say, President Phillips, it's great to see you again. I know you've seen me on many occasions over the years. Trustee Reckler, it's a pleasure to meet you. And I would think that you'll probably be seeing my face pretty regularly over the course of your term. My name is Blake Beam with K&N Public Finance. I serve as the district's municipal advisor, and our firm has served in this role and capacity for the district over the last 13 plus years.
And I know you from the audience, so
Perfect.
all of those years.
So
And Blake loves the fact that we're no longer having to have him fly up and stay overnight for the late night meeting. And
Yeah, no, we're not doing that anymore.
Zoom has been a blessing and a curse, I think, in a variety of ways, but for me and flying, a blessing for sure. So just for clarity's sake, the role of a municipal advisor, we are regulated by the Security and Exchange Commission and the MSRB to act as the district's fiduciary as it relates to all oversight and management of the district's extensive bond program. And so, as Dr. Wold alluded to, I'm going to, for purposes of this presentation, just do a brief overview of all of the district's voter-approved general obligation bond measures, which extends back to 1998. It covers 7 individual measures, which have collectively authorized over $2.2 billion. As you can see in the table below, nearly all of the district's existing older, and I say older, prior to the recent Measure R 2020 authorization, all of the prior measures have since been exhausted and put towards capital facility improvement projects, with the exception of 2005 Measure J. 2005 Measure J really faced the brunt of the Great Recession in terms of assessed value volatility. And that was coupled by a unique assessed value impact from the Chevron refinery. And so between the two, the impacts of assessed value has really kept the 2005 measure constrained from a tax rate perspective, meaning that the statutory tax rate associated with just that specific authorization is $60 per 100,000 of assessed value. And we have been constrained by that tax rate, really almost over the last decade, again, largely caused by the Great Recession. And so while most of that authorization has been accessed, there's just over $77.5 million of authorization remaining, which will not expire. It does not go away. It has been the choice of the district up to today, and perhaps will continue to be the choice, to leave that authorization there in order to preserve, to the best of the district's abilities, the tax rate commitment that was made to voters for that authorization, and to not add any extraordinary tax burden by accessing that authorization, which frankly could be accessed today if the district wanted to. It would require the use of a financing tool known as capital appreciation bonds, which is a financing tool that defers payments to a later date, both interest and principal payments. And the way that that works is the interest, while not being paid in the near term, actually accumulates, or what we call in the finance world, accretes on itself, causing the repayment of capital appreciation bonds generally to be more costly than your more traditional current interest bonds, which current interest bonds are what many of us would think, going back to this mortgage analogy, we're paying principal and interest each month, each year, that's your typical traditional GO bond as well, or general obligation bond. And that's referred to as a current interest bond that pays current interest, whereas a CAB does not. It defers interest to a later date. So
So
Can
what
I-
happens with cabs is
Can I,
that,
actually,
yeah,
can
go
I ask you to back up a minute and explain to the audience why we're capped at this $60 per 100,000?
So I'll start and then Blake can join in. When we borrowed back in 2005 for that series and those subsequent years, we had to borrow at a higher rate, which cost more money. We also, trying to access money quicker, we used some of those devices, the capital appreciation bonds, which you borrow now, pay later, but pay later at a higher rate. So what ended up happening is we're paying at that $60 rate so quickly because we borrowed so much so fast that to borrow more, we would have to go over the $60 rate, which we can't do, or we would have to do what Blake says is borrow the money now, but not pay it back for 10, 15, 20 years. And then when you're paying it back, all that interest has been accreted on. So the most egregious example of this is about 15 years ago, Poway Unified took out $100 million in bonded loans. The repayment, because they were capital appreciation bonds, will cost the taxpayers in that district just under $1 billion, a 10-to-1 repayment ratio.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
And so we really look at the most important metric when you're looking at a bond for a board member is the repayment ratio, meaning what multiplier from the amount you borrowed are you paying back? So you can see our ratios started at 1.83, meaning that for $1 borrowed, you're paying $1.83 total back, to that 2.43 for that measure. Our last two have fallen at the 1.98. You want to try to be as close to, what's the range that you're aiming for, Blake?
I mean, just the traditional benchmark that we aim for would be a 2-to-1 payback. You know, for a high credit municipal issuer like West Contra Costa is, 2-to-1 is really our goal. You can see as the cost of borrowing increased over the course of time, those repayment ratios increased. A large part of going up and over the 2% was the fact that the alternative to moving forward with an issuance would be to completely change the momentum and movement of the district's capital improvement projects and really large program that the district has had for decades now. And the expectation, you know, within the community and the board at the time, these measures were considering issuing cabs, was to press on with projects, issue what you can see in the repayment ratios was fairly cost-effective cabs at just over 2-to-1, far different than what Dr. Wold just highlighted as an example of a 10-to-1 repayment ratio. The other thing I'll point out is since the Poway headlines and kind of the media stir around cabs, there has since been legislation passed, which really provides a framework for which school districts can issue bonds in general, but certainly applies to cabs. And it limits the repayment ratio at no higher than 4-to-1. Cabs must be issued with a term no longer than 25 years. That was another component to that high repayment ratio that Poway had. Those were 40-year cabs. They weren't being paid off for nearly 40 years on some cases. And then lastly, all cabs need to be callable, as there were cases where there was a number of capital appreciation bonds being sold that were not callable, preventing the opportunity to refund down the road.
And for those listening, callable means that you could refinance it at a certain date. If they're non-callable, you have no immediate way to get out of that loan, other than there are programs out there where you can try to rebuy them at a premium, but that's a whole different conversation. This slide, though, for board members the most important thing for you, because I know you're going to ask later, what do we need to know about this one, is what is the projected repayment ratio? Are you following the industry standards whenever you issue bonds out?
Right. And currently the district's program as a whole is at 1.85 to 1. And I would consider that as a general rule of thumb, a cost-effective bond program, particularly given the fact that there is over $1 billion of debt outstanding. And that is a great management metric coming from this slide for board members to know. So next, sorry, the last thing I want to point out is in the appendix of this presentation, there is a detailed breakout measure by measure of all bonds outstanding and having been refunded and sold. So for those that are very number oriented and like to dive into the details, it is included, but it's so much content, we moved it to the appendix for a reference sake, just so we can move through this presentation.
But what I wanted to go back, if we could just go back to that for a minute, that we're capped at this 60 per 100,000. And can you talk about that? Like, you can't just go out there. That is our limit.
Go ahead, Blake.
We are in a current place. And again, this is just applicable to the 2005 Measure J. We are in a place right now where we're looking at two primary variables. And I'm actually going to speak to these variables later in the presentation. One of which is assessed valuation growth. As assessed value grows and has been in the last 5-6+ years within the district, the growth has been higher than what we've projected. It helps to alleviate the tax rate constraint in the near term. Additionally, as we're letting years kind of roll off from the existing debt that's been sold, we're buying ourselves time on the back end. So as that debt falls off, there is going to be an opportunity down the road to issue current interest bonds from 2005 Measure J to help supplement with whatever active authorization is in place at that time, which right now we have a new Measure R, which is expected to carry the torch for the district really for the next decade, frankly.
Yeah, so the refinancing our access for the 2005 measure, Blake will still be here because he's young, but hopefully he'll be retired by then. So that gives you an idea that we got a little while till we're going to be able to access that money.
It will be a while. It will be a while.
Oh, really? Okay, so
Blake, I just want to clarify one thing, just so because I'm not sure it's obvious on this slide, is that each of these bond measures, each time you go to voters, the legal limit of $60 per 100,000 applies to that specific authorization. So even though you may have issues with respect to Measure J and accessing additional proceeds from Measure J, the Measure R has its own $60 limitation per 100,000 that comes with that, which is not constrained.
Correct. So
Absolutely
you
correct.
can basically go 60, 60, 60, 60, and you understand the total. And we have a slide to show that as we get a little farther.
right. Okay, so
into-
that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
Each one of these is capped at 60 per 100,000, except that fluctuates over time. So if your assessed value goes up, then there's more for you.
There's
And
more access, yes.
There's more access. And if you retire your debt, then you have more. But it's for
And-
each one of those, and they're
And that's
all
where we're going to
separate.
show you.
Okay, so you're going
now.
to get there. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. All right,
Yeah.
I'm just moving. I'm ahead of you.
No, it's all right. You're asking great questions. You're spot on, and I welcome these along the way. Randy, thanks for pointing out that difference in that there's an individual tax rate for each measure.
Right, thank you. That's what I was trying to get at. And I want you to make your presentation, but there's also, this is very dense and complicated, and there's just a couple of things I'm trying to pull out just so that the audience gets it as well.
Yeah, so to conclude, Measure J, because of its own respective tax debt outstanding that was sold, does have a constraint and will for the foreseeable future. Measure R, which was just authorized by voters, which has a separate tax rate entirely, has literally zero debt outstanding at this time
Right.
and has ample capacity to fund future projects for the district and is expected to over the next decade.
And that's one we're going to
You're
talk
welcome
later
for
about.
that, by the way.
We will be talking later about when we should do the first issuance and how much as we go into the pieces here.
Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, and this is something that my firm KNN was intimately involved in planning with staff and the board. Back in 2013, the district brought to the board and ultimately approved a refunding and restructuring policy, which is not a requirement. It was a proactive step taken by the district to really put forward guidelines and specific parameters for which considering to bring to market potential refunding of outstanding debt. A great step. Frankly, we don't see this a lot in school districts. We do see it more often in city and county spaces. And it really has served as a great barometer for us as we've annually monitored outstanding debt and refunding opportunities. And so really the objectives of this policy, just Tony, staying back on the last slide, there at the bottom, the objectives of this policy look at three key things, one of which is taxpayer savings. First and foremost, how much taxpayer savings are generated in today's dollars as a present value basis. Secondly, it looks at tax rate management, which has been an instrumental part of the bond program management for West Contra Costa Unified. And thirdly, it's adjusting debt service structure, which could be replacing cabs with current interest bonds, shortening the term of repayment where opportunities exist, moving the repayments around when refunding bonds in order to facilitate tax rate management. So really three key objectives coincide with this policy, and they are embedded within the policy itself. Next slide. Oh no, sorry, you got your right on here. So really the guidelines that we look at, these are the minimum benchmarks, is achieving at least 4% present value savings. And when I say 4%, that's total savings in today's dollars as a percentage of the par amount of bonds refunded. That's really the calculation. An industry standard ranges from 3% at the time the policy was put in place. 4 was kind of the mid-range benchmark, and I think very appropriate benchmark that was selected. And that's our minimum criteria. Now, when advance refunding bonds, and what that means is when existing bonds are refinanced or refunded more than 90 days before those older bonds are actually callable. Mr. Phillips has a question. President Phillips, did you have a question?
No, I'm actually sitting at Grant Elementary School and people are walking by me. And so an employee smiled at me and I was waving. So that wasn't for you. That's all, sorry.
That's a cheery interruption. So certainly welcome for sure. Especially when we're going through advanced refunding bonds and benchmarks. So it's nice for a little wave to come in there. The bonds can be callable, meaning that you lock in rates, you lock in savings ahead of the older bonds being callable. And the proceeds of the refunding bonds have to sit in an escrow account until those older bonds reach their call date, the first date that they can actually be refunded. During that time, the cost of the new bonds typically outweighs the amount of earnings of the escrow. And the function of that is called negative arbitrage. It's actually a negative savings accumulation when advance refunding bonds. And so you really have to put a critical eye on the decision to advance refund, meaning that you either think rates are going to go up and you won't be able to achieve the same level of savings by waiting, and or one of your other objectives are playing a part, tax rate management and or debt restructuring. So advanced refunding bonds have been a commonplace for the district, I think in a very positive way. And we manage it with this policy by saying that the negative arbitrage shall not exceed the amount of present value savings. So that's that third criteria, or the second criteria there. We're not moving slides. I want to go through the last couple here, and I'll go quick, Tony. The last is $1 million, at least $1 million of present value savings, an annual savings of $100,000. The term of a refinancing will not extend the total repayment of the original bonds that were sold. And then, of course, the last two tie back to those objectives, which is tax rate management and debt restructuring.
And so that term is an important one, because you don't want to start refinancing something that was going to be paid off in the next 5 years and add 20 years of payments.
So on the next slide, it summarizes all of the district's prior refundings. The district has successfully refinanced on 8 separate occasions outstanding bonds, saving taxpayers collectively nearly $85 million of interest payments. This is a phenomenal slide, and something that really showcases the proactiveness of the board, of staff, and the collective team to really closely monitor opportunities and not let an opportunity pass without trying to save taxpayers dollars.
And you can see that the last one we did in May of last year was a 10% savings, which brings us to, I believe, Raymond James.
Thanks, Tony.
Okay, so now you have to explain your piece in the.
Quick intro on me. My name is Randy Merritt. I'm with Raymond James, and we are a bond underwriting firm. And like my colleague Juan Fernandez at JP Morgan, who you heard from earlier, do the market update. Our firm's primary responsibility or role in the transaction is really serving as an intermediary between the school district that wants to borrow money and in bond investors that want to invest their money in the form of loans in order to earn a return on their investment in the form of interest. And so our firm sits in between those two, and we bring in investors to buy the district's bonds. That's our primary function, is setting the interest rates and finding buyers. And just one other thing on this point, for larger school districts like yourself that have very active construction programs, it's common to have multiple underwriters. And in this case, there's 2. And for every transaction, when you have multiple underwriters, you have to have a lead. And so in this financing, JP Morgan serving as the lead transaction, we're going to be sort of a support underwriter on the transaction, which we call a co-manager. So I'm going to talk on the next couple pages here a little bit more about refunding, and I'd characterize the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that went into effect in 2018 as a tectonic shift in terms of how we go about transacting refunding bonds. Prior to 2018, we had the ability to refinance bonds that were callable more than 90 days out into the future using another series of tax-exempt bonds. And tax-exempt bonds, as we talked about, come at a lower interest rate than taxable bonds. So as part of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act in 2018, they took away the ability to use tax-exempt bonds to finance refundings that occur more than 90 days in advance of the call date. And so what we were left with was having to use taxable bonds, which have a little bit higher interest rate. We've been fortunate during that period of time since 2018 that we've enjoyed a low interest rate environment. So the penalty for selling taxable bonds has been not as substantial as it has been in the past. It's worth pointing out that there is a lot of momentum building to overturn some of these changes, and there's been legislation introduced that could bring back tax exempts, which I think would be cheered by all municipalities because it gives them another tool to be able to access the cheapest form of borrowing possible to lower their outstanding debt payments. Next page there, Tony. Thanks. So as Blake had alluded to at the top of the presentation, in between financings, we're always monitoring the outstanding bonds to see if there's opportunities to refinance. And every day interest rates are moving up or down. And what we've tried to do here is to take a snapshot as of earlier this week, what savings opportunities exist for the district and its taxpayers. And so we've identified 4 series of bonds, and we've ran that through current interest rates. And the bottom line is you're looking at potentially an opportunity to save taxpayers, kind of down in that bottom right-hand corner, $28 million.
So I want to stop there for just a second so that you could hear what we just said.
I'm sorry, could you say that again? I didn't hear that.
I know. We had just trumpeted that we've saved taxpayers $80 million over the entirety of our work. We are showing right now, we have an opportunity to take us over 100 million in pure real savings. There may be up to $28 million in taxpayer savings with these 4 series. If we begin the process of taking to the board authorization for us to begin the refinancing. So I just didn't want to leave this slide without that.
Well, you could say it again.
We're talking about taking the district over 100 million in taxpayer savings from what was initially voted in with this refinancing opportunity.
Yeah, and I think there's one other thing that's important to point out here on this slide, and there's a lot of numbers on here. But just because interest rates are low does not mean that it is the right time to refinance the bonds. And what I'm getting at there is we talked a little bit about when we do an advance refunding, the old bonds stay out for a longer period of time. So let's say we want to refinance some bonds that are callable in this table here, 2022 or 2023 or 2024. We want to lock in today's interest rate. So we sell new bonds. And from that sale, we generate an amount of money, and we're going to deposit that money with a third party, with a bank trustee. Okay, we might be able to borrow at 3%, but we're only going to be investing it for 1, 2, or 3 years. And so we can only earn maybe 50, half a percentage point or 1%. And so for that period of time, there's an inefficiency where you're borrowing at a rate that is higher than you can reinvest it at. And that gets encapsulated into this concept of negative arbitrage, where it's a drag or inefficiency to the financing. So if you had extremely high negative arbitrage, there could be a situation where even when you're in a low interest rate environment, you say, hey, let's wait another year or 2 or 3 till we get closer to that call date so the negative arbitrage is lower and the bond transaction is more efficient. And so that's part of the analysis. It's not just simply saying, hey, we're in a low interest rate environment. It's a combination of multiple things. And that's what, you have Blake and our team that we look at and we evaluate and make recommendations based on that.
So if we decide that we want to sell bonds, we have to get a credit rating. And there's all sorts of different ratings out there. There's multiple rating agencies. And this is really the percentages and how your credit score for a district gets calculated there. And so when you take a look at it, it looks at what is the management structure. So when we do ratings calls, Blake will go in, usually the underwriters sometimes come with us as well. But a lot of the conversation is management and our ability to be able to tell our story. While the numbers do drive the score, as you can see, the amount of debt you already have, the fund balances and the financings, history, the state's financial support, and then the economy. that management piece is a big deal as it plays out. And what you can see is when you look at all the ratings, or we're going to show how the ratings come on the next slide, about 45% of school districts have an A+ rating. You can see how they're kind of broken out in each of the categories there as we go forward. So this is a pretty busy but pretty cool chart to show us. And so what you see is the different groups out there: Moody's, Standard and Poor's, and Fitch. Fitch charges a lot, so I don't like to use them anymore because their fees for a rating are very, very high, even though sometimes the ratings are okay. There's a new one out there, Kroll.
I've never even heard of Fitch.
Well, there you go. They charge a lot and you haven't heard of them. So Moody's is on timeout with us because of their last rating. Standard and Poor's understood and did not lower our rating during the last assessment. Moody's did go down 1. So if we go back to Moody's, they better step it up because they made me a little cranky. They didn't play out, and we may look at Kroll. But what I wanted
I
to
don't
have
know, maybe we should look at Fitch because I like what they, maybe it's worth it.
well, so this just has to do with the special tax. That's nothing. So if you look at where Fitch is, they are right here. So if you take a look at our current ratings, and this is the top rating, this is the lowest ratings, you can see that our ratings have been going up and they stayed up. You can watch Moody's. We were here for a long period, and then Moody's did that little blip there. Whereas Standard and Poor's has gone up and is staying, moving along. You can see the same thing here. Fitch has just been sitting right there. So the highest rating we have currently is Standard and Poor's, but you can see the district's rating over time has gone up completely. And then there's a completely different rating for long-term issuances that just came on the market. It has nothing to do with our bonds, but that's just how they rate municipalities. It's a new metric. And so our ratings have continually gone up. We received this Standard and Poor's rating while we were still qualified with our budget. And so we are in a different budget situation, and I believe we have a different story to tell as we go forward to prove again that management piece, and hopefully that will kick us up as we go. So as we continue with the ratings, there we go. They also are really triggered by assessed value. That's how much you can really borrow. And I believe, was this you again, Blake, or is this me? Can't remember.
Yeah, I'm just going to go over some of the elements of, when we're issuing bonds, things that really shape how much we can issue and when we can issue. And this is really pertinent for Measure R as we're getting started and have not sold any bonds. One of the elements, and I had mentioned this earlier, is assessed valuation. Assessed valuation is projected to grow year after year. No one has that crystal ball and knows exactly what the district's tax base is going to grow by. And so what we do is we look at the historical data and we do our best to put forward conservative growth assumptions. Those conservative growth assumptions really shape the anticipated revenue from property taxes that will be available to repay debt year after year after year while the bonds are outstanding. Now, the revenue in relation to the debt outstanding is how the county determines a tax rate. And so all of these things are very important for, one, allowing the district to access its voter-approved authorization and maintain the tax rate commitment that voters authorized. And as Randy pointed out earlier in the presentation, each authorization has its own voter-approved tax rate, which is distinct and calculated separately from that of any of the other authorizations. Then separately on that page is a statutory bonding capacity limit. And that's different than the tax rate, but also a constraint. And that is by many viewed as the credit card limit of the district. And by statute, for a unified district, it's 2.5% of its then current assessed valuation. Now, that 2.5% of assessed valuation ties back to old legislation that was originally adopted back in 2000. And that's when the state facilities match dollars were more readily available. It was a different environment. And there has been a number of legislative pushes to increase that statutory bonding capacity amount. In fact, it was on the last state bond to change that limit and move it up. It has not yet happened. And so for a district the size of West Contra Costa, that does encompass some lower valuation areas, it's hard to maintain that statutory limit. And so that's why for the last several authorizations, the district has pursued a bonding capacity waiver with the State Board of Education. And we'll go into those in more detail. So on this next page, going back to the concept of AV and growth projections, just looking at the graph at the bottom, you can see, depending on what your growth projection is, it has a direct influence on the amount of revenues that would be made available to access debt or to issue debt and repay debt. And so the idea would be, if you move away from what the historical data points would suggest are a viable long-term average, you could find yourselves in a situation where the debt actually is exceeding what the tax revenues are, in which case you go up and over your tax rate of $60 potentially in those cases. Or if you're overly conservative and you under project what the actual growth is, you're stretching out your bond program for a longer period of time, which usually equates to higher construction costs due to inflation and construction cost escalation. So there's a bit of, there's a bit of science and a bit of art to this. I think the main point being is err on the side of conservatism. And that's what West Contra Costa has done for its program by and large. And for Measure R, we took it even to another level. We actually assumed a 3% average annual growth rate relative to what the district's actual AV has done, which is on the next page.
See if I can get it to move. Sorry. There we go.
So this looks at what the district's actual assessed valuation has been over the last 30 plus years. As you can see, and really the box to the top left, I think summarizes it quite well, because it looks at the average growth over incremental periods in time, and those periods being 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And it kind of removes some of the volatility associated with the year-over-year growth. But you can see over the last 5 years, very strong growth, over 5.5%, nearly 5% over 10 years. You see a decline that 15-year, and again, that's largely driven by the Great Recession years, where in some cases there was double-digit declines, and as opposed to actual growth. But then going back 20 years, you're still over 5%. And so for many of the district's older voter-approved authorizations, the average growth projection has been 4%. We scaled back even more so for the most recent, just because we were in the midst of a pandemic, and we felt it was a good opportunity just to scale back even further. And again, Measure R is based on a 3% average annual growth rate.
And you can see on here where Measure J got hit in 2010-11 and 2011-12. Those big drops instantaneously take away your ability to do any projects. And if you had already scoped out a project, and let's say you had started digging in a building of a new school, with the anticipation that every 2 to 3 years, you're going to issue more bonds, and you're halfway in the middle of that construction project and that assessed value drops, you can't access the funds you were planning to access without doing some other financing. And so you could have a half-built building sit there and have to stop construction. So part of the reason we picked 3% is so we know the second we break ground on something, if we're planning to do 2 issuances to complete that project, we know with fairly good assurance that we can project and plan out. So very much under promising and over delivering.
Yeah, and I don't think we've ever had anything stop. So,
Yeah, we were lucky, but there was a cost to having nothing stop in Measure J. The cost of borrowing limited the fact that you could not access all of that money. So there is a consequence if you're not recognizing all the aspects of it. And people think that we passed a $575 million bond. That means we get to put $575 million in the bank. It doesn't work exactly that way.
no, it does not. But still, I also think the cost of like having a half-built building is worse than
That's why the decision was made, and we're not, and that's, as we said, those are the consequences of what happens. And that's why educating people on all the factors beforehand helps take away any of the stigmas or blames.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, you know, when Measure R was planned and all of the district's bond authorizations were planned, it's not at the valuation at a given point in time. It's expected that we're going to grow, the AV is going to grow over the course of time. And so we're going to be able to incrementally access what's authorized. And so that's, to Tony's point, why the 575 for Measure R is not going to be accessed all at once. And that's from a tax rate management standpoint. And then of course, there's also the bonding capacity standpoint, which is on our current slide here. You know, this is also, you know, a snapshot calculation based on the statutory limit. We would have no existing capacity to issue any of Measure R. Fortunately, as the State Board of Education has done in the past, they have closely evaluated what is frankly quite a comprehensive application that KNN and district staff work on to submit for their agenda. And it walks through a detailed analysis of exactly when we expect to issue incrementally Measure R and what the waiver percentage needs to be and for how long. And we were fortunate to once again be approved by the State Board of Education for a waiver that would be applied on Measure R in an amount up to 4.05% of the then current assessed value. And you can see that calculation at the bottom right, which gives us really ample room to look at the first issuance of Measure R. Now, it's not going to be for the full amount, but the one thing I'll point out is as AV grows in the future and as bonds are paid down over time, that capacity limit really increases exponentially. And on the next slide, we show visually how that happens. So you can see here in 2021, that's really representative of that 220 million roughly amount that could be accessed today if so needed for projects. But then over time, the significant growth in that number, which is reflected both in the yellow and the green bars. And really what those reflect is in yellow is the amount of old bonds being paid off. And so as those old bonds are being paid off, there's capacity for new bonds to be sold. And then in the green portion of those bars, that is the anticipated assessed valuation growth that also gives us more room in the future. And so between the two, added to the capacity that we have, you can see how we're expecting to be able to, again, incrementally access the 575 million of Measure R, not all at once, but over the course of time as statutory bonding capacity grows and as our tax rate with assessed valuation growth is able to be managed.
So for the public, the most important walkaway here is that the 575 million, for us to get to that number, you see that it's 2027 based on these projections. And that if we had 0 assessed growth, we wouldn't quite be there yet by 2027. We'd be close because of the amount we had paid down, but there does need to be assessed value growth as well for us to be able to issue all 575 million over the next 6 years. So it's not over 1 year or 2 years. And so we'll talk about a potential schedule as we go forward, but I think that's a real important thing to see how each of these factors works together. And
Tony, did you want to take this section? Or
No,
would
I
you like
thought
me
we were
to
going to have Lewis come in now, weren't we?
I think that you and I were going to take it.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So if you're so inclined, why don't you know, I've been talking for a bit. Why don't you take this section if you're
So
okay?
here's where we're looking right now. With Measure R, there's a couple things. We need to finish up, and Lewis will talk about the prioritization in a little bit. As soon as we do that, we'll be identifying projects 1, 2, 3. And then it's a matter of when can we go through the architectural process, the DSA process to get to shovel ready. We also know that right now, the market is very positive for financing. So knowing that, we really look at when should we go out and how much. We are looking at the ability to this year in 2021 go up to approximately 150 million, though once you borrow, you're supposed to spend those dollars within 3 years. Otherwise, you can have yourself in a position that you don't want to be in, where you're paying for the negative. So we may determine that Series A gets split up into half and half of that, where we issue some in 2021 and then the second half in 2022, based on what is the best project scope place. And then we would come back in 23 for the next 150 as we go through. And it's a lot of it is managing those tax rates. We know this, we did not this fiscal year do any charge of Measure R to taxpayers because we had not started the project. But we start assessing next year at the $60. It makes sense to also be issuing to move forward simultaneously. So that's one of the things. We haven't determined the timing, whether it will make the most sense to go right during the refinancing that we're going to recommend or right after. There's an economy of scale to do that as we go forward. And you can see the tax rates there. There's a whole bunch of different things to show how they get paid back. And so this is the timeline. If we said go today there, we still have to have the board authorize the bonds, meaning we have to put a resolution together, all the different pieces. We have to go and get that credit rating, something that the timing is good to do. We have to write the preliminary official statement. We have to pre-market the underwriters, the bonds to investors, explain what is it that we're trying to sell, who are we, do the pre-pricing, get ready, do the post-sale actions, and then close. So that takes several months of that process. So if we wanted to sell at the end of June, we would want to have the board, this committee say, get ready to get going, bring us something probably mid-May for the board to approve that process to go. Did I hit all of the key elements of that, Blake? Because I went kind of quick because we're running a little bit past time.
Yeah, no, you did. Those are the key things. It's roughly a 60 to 90-day process. It doesn't happen all at once. And I think the conversation that we're having today is really reflective of, on this timeline, step one, meeting with budget and accounting review, the subcommittee for just an informational discussion about the timeline and information. But there is a refunding opportunity that could potentially save taxpayers millions. And there is consideration for kicking things off in some amount for the Measure Our Bond program.
And just to piggyback on that before you move to the appendix is really the most important thing is that we get our prioritization committee move forward to the board so they can approve the prioritization metrics so we can apply the weighting factors to the 19 priority schools so we can get a list of projects. Funding on architectural design is always smaller than construction. And so that's the next piece is really is to enter into those contracts so we can move forward on design and start establishing our budgets and our spend for our cash flow.
And so the appendix, we're not going to go through all of those different pieces. This is kind of our finish line. What we're asking the committee for is I'm going to go back to the big Randy slide. We're asking the committee if they recommend for us to begin this process, and simultaneously, as we're continuing the work that Lewis talked about, layer in when do we want to do Series A. And we think that if we believe that we can spend all of Series A within the 3 years and avoid that penalty, we would want to likely get the synergy of combining it with our refinancing, because if you do one bigger transaction, you're paying less on your fees, and the cost of borrowing goes down slightly as a percentage. So with that, we'll take questions.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That was a lot.
We threw it all in.
This should have been the only topic. We're not getting the audit's going to be like, okay, hope they're unmodified, because that's going to be the end. Okay, so first, thank you to everybody, and thank you for being here. You know, I have never lost sight at how big this program is and how heavily that weighs on me. It weighed on me before working for all these bonds to get, these GOs to get them passed. And it especially weighs on me now that I'm a trustee. So I take this very seriously and lose sleep over it. So just want everybody to know that. So for a couple of questions, and I'll be reviewing this video and this presentation in depth before it comes back again. All right. So first is just one question, which is refunding versus refinancing. This is the same thing, correct?
Yes,
Right?
they're synonymous.
So can we stop using the word refunding? Is that possible? Because people think that they're like getting a rebate check on their taxes or something, and it doesn't exactly work that way. So just internally in this organization, is that a possibility that we stop using that and just use refinance, which makes sense if you're a homeowner, or, you have a mortgage or something like that?
We can and we will for purposes of communication's sake. I will say the exception will be materials that are prepared for the marketplace will use refunding. That is the standard terminology that we use within the preliminary official statement and elsewhere. But for presentations, of course.
Because then it makes sense. It's like you can relate that, oh, it's like a mortgage. Okay, we're refinancing, we're dropping our interest rate, we're lowering our payments. So I think that would make a lot of sense. As far as our board policy, is our board policy good? Does it need to be updated or shined up?
In my view, it still corresponds to current benchmarks that I think are relevant in today's marketplace, the 4% present value savings. I think that there are some other elements that we have been utilizing for purposes of monitoring refunding opportunities, or I'm sorry, refinancing opportunities.
I'm gonna have to get you a
Um,
little cuss jar for that, right?
Yeah, it's going to take a while. I apologize. It's just embedded in my brain. Which is also escrow efficiency, which is not an element of the policy itself. But we can certainly discuss and explore opportunities to either brush some items into the policy. I don't know that there's anything that is no longer relevant that we would exclude, though. I'll say that.
Yeah, it seems like there's a number of years that have gone by and it might be time, to take out the buffer and just shine a few things up
Yeah, so the escrow efficiency would be one that I think we may want to consider. And while the 4% is the benchmark, I know personally, I don't even look at something if they bring me a proposal that's 4.5, and well, it's above the policy, I'm very unlikely to even bring that forward for the trustees' consideration, because when we start, it might be 4.5%, but the market changes, and then it's very likely that that could end up at 3.8 when you're done. So I like to have a little pad. I wouldn't change the policy, but as a practice, kind of like the AR version of the policy, don't be excited when it's just at the minimum.
Yeah, both Tony and I have a very critical eye as we're evaluating these analyses year after year, and I would echo what was just shared. It's not just by meeting the bare minimum. Now it's a thumbs up, let's bring it to the board type of thing.
Okay. What other school districts are model, have excellent practice and procedure that I could look at, that have excellent board policies, who have done well, who have delivered consistently, that I can just take a peek at and
Typically, it's going to be some of the larger organizations that are going to be, more politically scrutinized, that are going to have a larger array of policies and procedures that you may want to look at. And from a K-12 standpoint, San Diego Unified is one of our clients. That would not be a bad one. They do have a good array of policies. LA Unified, for the mass that it is.
yeah, they're just so hard to get. It's so hard to swim through them.
LA Community College District, again, another one of our clients, also extremely large, but I think might have better access points for you to look at in terms of their own respective policies, and they got quite an array of them. So those are just some of K&N's clients that I can think of off the top of my head. I don't know if any of our other underwriting team, has any suggestions that they work with that might be a good resource for you as well.
I can start with them. I knew you were going to say LA, and I've someone smaller. They're massive. The other questions are, what other controls do we need to put in place? I mean, do you feel that we have this locked down?
I think that your process of the deep dive and explanation at the subcommittee level is hopefully something that is working in the district's favor, and there's some good recommendations that go back to the board as a whole, and we can kind of share the highlights with that secondary step. I think having good policies, in addition to the refunding and restructuring policy, also having a debt management policy are good.
Debt management? We do?
We
Okay.
do.
You leverage third-party experts to their fullest, both in terms of demographics, disclosure, underwriting. So I think that this is a program that has been quite a established program for a number of years, and you have, starting with your staff, people that are paying attention to this on a daily basis and constantly outreaching to third-party people to make this all come together and work well before it even gets to the board for consideration. So I think you guys are doing a lot of things right with respect to the bond management.
And one of the things that I wanted to add, as we bring our bond program management plan forward to the board for adoption, we do have a section in this plan that we worked very closely with KNN to add in, because really what we want to continue to do is just continue to demonstrate these best practices and continuity in practice, right? But to that end, I will ask a clarifying point because I live at ground level. Our board policy is actually called a refunding policy, and in our program management plan section that discusses bond financing strategies, we do use the refunding terminology. And so I was wondering if maybe we added a sentence that clarified that refinancing and refunding are synonymous. Maybe that could bridge that gap such that if somebody, for example, was looking at our disclosure documents or otherwise, then they would have that understanding. And the other thing I would share is we have an annual key performance indicators bond report that we provide to our CBOC. It's part of their annual report that they do. It doesn't have the level of detail that we get in these fantastic presentations when we have our experts on the line, but it's really capturing some of the key historical details as well as just kind of an indication across our bond measures of like interest paid per date, filling in, amount per site, and some of those details, because we really think as long as we're actively engaging in this and actively communicating what we're doing the best that we can, and definitely not losing focus on continuing to try to manage the very best that we can.
And I think that's a great idea. Anywhere we have refunding, we can put refunding and refinancing is the same, but I can't tell you the number of times people have been like, oh, am I getting a refund on my taxes? And I'm like, well, it doesn't really work like that, sort of, but no. So, okay, thank you. Okay, what other questions do I have? Okay, so then coming into measure R. So so Series A for 150 million. So we have to kind of line this thing up. We need to have a prioritization criteria, and then we need to kind of start thinking about projects, because 150 million might just be a high school, or it might be, 4 elementary schools or 3 elementary schools, or a number of critical needs projects, that kind of thinking. So we need to time the money to the plan, to the, there's some synchronized swimming that needs to happen here.
Right, the priorities will drive how we define the financing. So whatever comes up as the number one priority, we cost out that priority. We then look at the number 2 and the number 3. Since we're going to do them in that order, we'll then determine how will the financing allow us to hit that timeline, and what will the timeline be? Because let's say that your number 1 and number 2, for this hypothetical, were both high schools. You can't draw that much money, so you may want to move a other school in the middle. You may do some shifting around to get a continual flow of projects where you don't stop and start. So that's part of our work, but you can't do one before the other. So you get the prioritization done clean without thinking about the dollars, then you bring in the dollars, and you don't want one to influence the other decision.
Yeah, and just keep in mind that as D&E were winding down, we didn't have shovel-ready projects for Measure R. So we had that whole planning component that has to happen. And so planning is a major piece. It takes a lot of time as far as planning, design, state approval of plans that are actually shovel ready to go at that point. So there is that lag over that 3-year period, as we talk about the negative arbitrage, that we have to be mindful of as we move forward.
And part of what the board will ultimately be asked to approve for Measure R will be an implementation plan. And so an implementation plan, it identifies your projects, it identifies the rough order magnitude budget for each one of those projects, and it identifies a tentative schedule based on the best information we have on the time of how we've set and met with our financial advisors to do a cash flow across the 575 million. And so all of that information is part of the options development and ultimately the direction and approval that we get from the board of how we will implement Measure R. Because in addition to those specific priority projects, we also have some of the technology and climate control and the other pieces. And so series of options would be developed. And again, ultimately, it's going to be the plan that the board approves that will really kind of set our course across, the next decade or so, potentially less.
Yeah, right. Let's just get through Monday, okay? That's all.
One thing at a time, right?
One thing at a time. So Series A at 150 may not be the correct number, correct?
Correct. We may end up breaking it into Series A1 and Series A2,
Okay.
depending on those factors. And that's why we may ask for authorization to begin the process, but price it over different pieces.
All right. I could definitely ask more questions, but I'm going to be quiet now.
And we still do have audit, but we'll go quick in audit.
But as far as the refinancing, I knew this was coming just based on the market. So the answer to me is, that's a no-brainer. President Phillips, anything?
Are you questions or refinance or what do you?
Oh, I'm done with questions. You have any questions on? I mean, I will eventually have more, but for today, that's enough for me.
I don't have any questions. Are you guys asking if I support refinancing?
Yes.
I do.
We'll see you in May at the board meeting. We'll be bringing that. I believe that's a timeline, right, Blake? That we would be bringing resolutions to the board at one of the May board meetings to begin the process.
Yeah, it would be the second meeting in May at the earliest, just given the time frame that it takes to draft documents and meet agenda deadlines. So that's already a lofty goal, but that's what we're shooting for, yes.
Sounds like a facilities meeting because we're bringing forward some items as well. So.
Oh, the whole board meeting sounds like a facilities meeting. Well, you only got through like 2 items at your last meeting, so you could have like 8 facilities meetings before you get to the board meeting. So okay.
That's it, unless there's comments.
No, I mean, it's such dense material. I mean, this is really important and it's detail oriented and it's dense and, I mean, there's a lot here. It's really, it's big stuff. So I don't want to rush it, but I also realize where the market is right now. So I'm, got 2 things going on. Okay, so with that, if there are no questions, I guess we need to go to public comment, and then we already had a little discussion, but we can please do public.
And there's no public comment.
Okay, so moving to discussion. So the refinancing is a no-brainer to me. As far as moving ahead with Measure R, it feels like we have a few little pieces to line up there, to get this organized and do this alignment, but
We'll have more information on the on the May meeting by then
Yeah.
too, on what the timing should be on that.
Yeah, and then we're onboarding new leadership. So, you know, we have a lot going on. So I'm open to it. I'm certainly open to it. But there is a lot going on, and those are all my comments. Thank you. President Phillips, anything?
No, I don't have any comments.
So I want to thank JP, Morgan Chase, KNN, and Raymond James for being here, and our facilities team. I'm going to let them just go either leave or camera off, and I'm going to transition us quickly and bring on 2 new people on camera if they'll turn their cameras on. I've already promoted them up. And then I'm going to bring over 2 more folks just so that we can enhance the panel a slightly different way. We're going to switch to the annual audit now as we go. And we've brought with us our auditors, Michael Ash and Monique Manzo, who just finished the annual audit this year. They're going to go fairly quickly. Do you want to do the PowerPoint or me, Michael?
I can do it, or you, whatever's
Okay.
easiest.
Okay, I'll let you go ahead and share. So he's going to go quickly over the annual audit. We do want to dial in on a couple of the finding areas and make sure that the board does hear some of the areas that we believe we need to continue to improve. And we ask Michael and Monique to take a critical eye when they look at our finances and our practices. And there are areas that they're recommending we continue to focus on. And I think that's a good thing. In fact, I'd be concerned as a board member if the audit's perfect, that maybe the auditor isn't looking tight enough and you want to ask some more questions. So with that, I'm going to let Michael and Monique give it to us.
Well, thank you, Tony. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Ash, a partner with Christy White, and I'm here with my colleague, Monique Manzo, who's a supervisor with our firm. So I'm going to focus on more of the high level things of the audit, and then I'm going to turn it over to Monique to go over a little bit more detail about the findings. So first off, I just really want to thank Board President Phillips and Trustee Reckler for having me here today and inviting us to this. And I really want to thank the district, because this was an audit year like no other. So, you know, traditionally we visit the district 2 times. We visit all the sites, and to try to do an entire audit remotely, you can imagine all the paper that goes into an audit. And so for the district to have to scan all of that to us and really come through like that, it really kudos to the district for that. And so normally this audit is due to the state December 15th and then has to be presented to the board in January. Because of COVID, they extended everything to March 31st, which we needed every day to be able to get this audit done. So this is just really quick highlight on the audit report, just outlining the school district responsibility and the auditor's responsibility. And I'm only going to focus on a couple things, and 2 of the misconceptions, the financial statement. So I would say most board members, if you ask them, they would think that the financial statements belong to the auditor because our letterheads are all over, you know, in the report and everywhere. That's not true. So the financial statements belong to the district. Now because we know all of the requirements that have to be in there, we take that information and we assist the district in compiling all that, but they are the district's financial statements. And then from the auditor side, you know, our job is to give an opinion on those financial statements, which does not address the financial condition of the district. And one of the things that misconceptions about the auditor side, people hear the word audit and they think, oh, well, you know, if the audit is clean, that's 100% assurance there's nothing wrong. And that's not necessarily true, because what an audit does is it samples, and an audit only provides reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance. So, you know, all of our procedures that we do, we design those procedures to minimize the risk of giving a wrong opinion, you know, as much as we possibly can. But unless we were to look at 100% of the district's transactions, you could never give 100% absolute assurance. So there's a concept called materiality. So our opinion says that the financial statements are materially correct. And what materiality means is, a user of the financial statements, like, the credit rating agencies that you talked about in the previous presentation. What materiality means is that it wouldn't influence a user of the financial statements decisions. So there's a calculation that goes through under what materiality means, but that's really the highlight. So when we're putting our stamp of approval in our opinion, it just means that a user of the financial statements can accept these to be materially correct. And the next slide is just, the actual wording that goes into the auditor's opinion. It's an unmodified opinion, the best that you can get. That's a clean opinion. And it just says that the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects. So that is 100% what you want. Okay, so now I'm going to walk through just each of the different reports that go along with the auditor's opinion. I will touch on the findings briefly, and then Monique will go into them in a little bit more detail. I know we're a little bit rushed for time, but so this is internal controls over financial reporting. So we have to do, every school district and charter school audit has to be done under what's called government auditing standards. It's also called Yellow Book. And what that means is we're not giving an opinion on the district's internal controls over financial reporting, but if we do come across anything that we deem to be a material weakness or a significant deficiency, we have to report it in what's called an audit finding. And there was one significant deficiency related to internal control over financial reporting, related to associated student body funds. Pretty much any school district could have a finding for ASBs. They're very difficult to control. There's a lot of cash that's involved with those. And Monique will cover that in a little more detail. Now, we also put together a management letter along with the financial statements. And what a management letter is this, that goes to the board, and that's saying that there were some items that we noted that we didn't deem to be significant enough to necessarily put in as audit findings, but we wanted to bring them to your attention and we want to follow up on them in the next audit. And there was one item on the management letter related to the financial statement, and that's reconciliation. So reconciliations of bank statements, of accounts, that's one of the most important internal controls that a district can have. And so in the past, some of the adjustments, adjusting entries, and there was a capital assets issue a couple of years back. That's the cause of that is not having enough reconciliations and not having those occur timely. So we wanted to stress that. This year, there were no audit adjustments. It certainly got better, but we really just wanted to stress that the district should continue to focus on reconciliations and continue to tighten up controls surrounding that. So the next opinion that we give is on federal. So every entity that spends over $750,000 during the year has to get a federal audit. It's called a single audit. And so with a single audit, there's a certain way that we have to pick the programs that are tested. And then there are certain compliance requirements that we have to look at. So the OMB puts out, the Office of Management and Budget puts out an audit guide each year. It's called the compliance supplement for all these programs. And there are certain things that they want the independent auditors to look at that they deem to be direct and material compliance requirements and things that we want to look at. So when we say an unmodified opinion on your federal, that doesn't mean that these programs are necessarily perfect. That means for the things that we were asked to look at in the audit guide, we did not have anything that we determined to be a significant deficiency or a material weakness in those. Now, we did have a couple of management letter comments related to federal. And as you probably know, the district is going to be receiving, all school districts, a ton of federal money upcoming with, the Coronavirus Relief Fund, all the CARES Act funds. I mean, there's so many federal dollars that are going to be coming into school districts. And with that comes a lot more scrutiny. There might not be audits just from us. There could be audits from, the CDE, California Department of Education, from the US Department of Education. So our comments related to your federal programs, we really just thought that it was important. We were able to get comfortable with what the district was doing for the 1920 audit, but we really thought that the time and effort reporting from the district for those federal grants that require it, so that's any employees that are charged to those grants have to be supported by, time and effort reporting. We really thought that could be strengthened, and the district is going to has a robust model already in place that they've already put into place for 2021. But we just really wanted them to focus on that because we know that those grants are going to be getting a lot of scrutiny. And then with the newer grants, it's just really going through all the different things that you can spend it on because there's a lot of money coming in, and I've seen in my experience that school districts are having a hard time figuring out exactly what they're going to spend it on. So just really understanding those programs and what are allowable uses of those monies. Just, we just wanted the district to tighten that down for 2021. And then finally, the last opinion that we give is on state compliance. So every year, every school district, charter school, county office of education has to undergo a state compliance audit. So there's an audit guide that's put out each year with all the different things that they want us to look at. So anything from your attendance reporting to instructional time, instructional materials, hearings, all kinds of things are in that audit guide. And so we were able to give an unmodified opinion, which is the best opinion possible again. We did find 4 reportable compliance findings, pretty much with state compliance. If it's a finding, if it's a weakness, it has to go in there. There's really no judgment on there. And Monique will go into more detail on these, but so ACES, unduplicated pupil counts, instructional materials, and school accountability report card. And these are 4 of our most common audit findings throughout the school districts that we look at. So these are not unusual audit findings. I would say ACES, just because of the number of procedures related to after school program that the compliance guide has. Unduplicated pupil counts, there's a lot of testing that goes into, that's your CalPADS reporting, and a lot of room for error. And if there's even just one student that's misclassified, it gets reported. Instructional materials, we do see that quite a bit too, with the hearing that has to go on. And finally, school accountability report card that get posted. We tend to see a lot of issues there related to fit forms not matching what's reported in the school accountability report card. So that's going to conclude my part. I'm going to turn it over to Monique. She's going to go over the findings in just a little bit more detail, and I know we're pressed for time. So Monique, if you could please take it away.
All right, thank you, Michael. So kind of to provide some background on the findings that are reported, when it comes to ACEs, like Michael stated, there's a bunch of components that we have to look at, but specifically what resulted in this finding was the comparison between the semi-annual attendance report reported to the CDE to the city span attendance reports. What we saw there was an understatement or underreporting of about 961 students served. And the cause for that was, I believe there was maybe turnover in the position, and just how the report was generated was a little differently than it had been in the past. So overall, we're just recommending, kind of enhance your reconciliation process when it comes to reporting the attendance to the CDE. Overall, there's no fiscal impact with this finding. In terms of the unduplicated LCFF pupil count, like Michael said, this is I want to say the most common finding we come across. So in this case, we selected a sample of students designated as English learners only from the 1.18 CalPADS report. So with just that one student that we identified as an exception due to reclassification in 18-19 year, that kind of drove the finding and also a penalty associated with that finding. So 1 out of 60 students was reclassified in 18-19 year and wasn't properly designated for 19-20 year. And the fiscal impact with this finding is $18,473. The next finding is related to instructional materials. I feel like I saw this more commonly this coming or 19-20 year. What drove this finding was the public hearing aspect of it. So districts are required to hold a public hearing on or before the 8th week from the first day of school. So for 19-20 year, the public hearing occurred on October 23rd, 2019, which was approximately, I want to say 9 to 10 weeks after that first day of school. Again, no fiscal penalty with this finding. The SARC finding, or the school accountability report cards, again, it comes down to the fit forms. So what we do here is we compare the facility conditions within the SARC for the appropriate year to the most recently prepared fit form. And what we saw here was one school didn't properly report for their external conditions. Overall, I find it was a huge improvement from the finding that was reported last year. To just report on this one aspect is a huge improvement. Again, no fiscal penalty associated with this finding. And just to circle back to the internal control over financial reporting that Michael was discussing earlier, and the ASB funds, what we noted there were just multiple internal control deficiencies over cash disbursements, cash receipts, and just overall review of bank reconciliations. So there we're just kind of recommending implementing sound controls, maybe providing some sort of training to staff responsible for ASB at your school sites. And again, I feel Michael kind of touched on, what was reported in the management letter. So again, it comes down to the reconciliation of bank accounts and account balances. Like Michael mentioned, in the past, we've had audit adjustments associated with accounts receivable, accounts payable, capital assets. And then when it comes down to the ASB funds, we did note stale dated checks. So just to kind of reconcile on a timely basis, would kind of, just ensure the ending balances for the year are accurate. Secondly, the time and effort reporting. When it comes down to federal programs, just ensuring that salaries and wages of employees charged to any federal program is supported by time and effort documentation. And lastly, just allowable activities and costs when it comes down to federal funding. With this CARES Act funding, being distributed, you just want to make sure that you have the proper internal controls and monitoring of any expenditures using federal money, and making sure you have proper documentation to support those expenditures. And that kind of concludes the financial audit.
So if there are any questions, we also have the parcel tax audit that there's really nothing found in there. So we can do that super fast there, because all of these audits will be coming to the next board meeting. We have to get them received. But questions on this one, and especially on the areas that were discussed that we need to improve.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to the guests. Nice to see you. Thank you for being here. And a lot easier than driving up, right? It's just like, I still marvel at it. So first of all, the finding on the student bodies, that does not surprise me at all. I mean, if you have walked into any high school and you do any cash handling or anything at a high school with student body funds, it's quite complex and very messy. So that was a comment, but I'm going to finish it up with just an overall, which is how, compared to other districts, what do the auditors see? There were some findings. Is it horrible compared to other districts? Is it, a call out? Where on the scale do the auditors see this?
I feel it's pretty common. Almost, I want to say 80% of the time, there's some sort of deficiencies noted. And it really comes down to just having appropriate documentation to establish an audit trail, most commonly with your cash collections. So it comes down to, your tally sheets and just kind of supporting the money that was actually collected and deposited. And when it comes down to expenditures, it's just having the proper approvals and, your invoices and receipts to support those expenditures.
And I would add that I would say compared to other districts, I would say this district takes ASB more seriously than most do. Margarita, I know, is very involved at doing her own internal audits at some of those school sites. So we walk into some districts and they don't really do their monitoring over their ASBs nearly as well as they do at this district. So I would say overall this district definitely takes the ASB more seriously than most do.
Okay, that's good to hear. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I have a high schooler and had a high schooler and am involved in how they do that. And I mean, it's just so many transactions and there's just tons of. I can't believe you brought this up. I'm like, oh my God, this is like, ugh, not surprising. So as a board though, what do we do now? Like, what's the best actions that the board takes to note it, and ensure that improvement measures are put into place?
I can speak a little bit to that, actually. one of the best ways is to actually avoid as much as possible cash transactions. We're not going to be able to eliminate them 100% because you're going to have gate type of transactions that occur, but eliminating or reducing cash transactions as much as possible. And between Margarita and Nydia, they've done a tremendous job, and I work with them very closely in doing that. So we have systems in place where we have the student stores, the web store, lots of things in place where we have done so, where we can reduce the amount of cash transactions because there is a paper trail at that point in time. And to Monique's point, it's just now a matter of making sure we're reconciling and getting the sites trained to do so. So of course there's turnover and there's different things that occur. And Margarita and Nydia do a fantastic job in making sure that they are getting a manual and different things in place and training as much as possible. But with folks moving around or, different people coming in and out of positions, it can be challenging, of course, because that's not all they do. But yes, making sure that we can kind of stay on top of it and getting folks trained would be very helpful. But for the board and everyone else to know, reducing cash transactions is definitely one step in the right direction to try to reduce some of those challenges.
And I know you have, and I know there's credit cards and stuff like that. Just we can take this offline. That process is a little cumbersome. It's not like whoosh, through the square and you're boop, 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 done. There's a little bit more to it. So just from being there and running those transactions myself and watching it, if it could be further simplified, that'd be awesome. But I think it's worth the the little finance charge that you pay to eliminate, all the other, you get that paper trail, you get everything else. I think it's worth it personally. Some other questions though on the federal and some of the compliance. As board members, once again, are we bringing a resolution? Like, how do we, document this and next year at this time come back and say, okay, here's where we were, this is the improvement plan, and this is how we end up?
So I think part of the answer would be right in the process, because anytime there's an audit finding, they have to go back and look at whether that was a finding from the previous year and check back as part of the process of the annual audit. We also have to put in a corrective action requirement as part of this audit to show that not only do we know it's there, but here's what we're going to do about it.
Okay,
And
so
all
that has to happen. And
Yes.
then on the federal and the state, to the auditors, once again, how serious is this? Is this like, it's a significant finding, but is it like a significant finding lightly, or is it a significant finding like, oh my God, you have serious work to do?
I would say lightly on that scale.
Okay. And so it's the same thing, these are being noted and we're following up on them next year. And you're going to keep a record of that too.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of this was in the CARES Act. As you know, you were allowed to go backwards, and that meant journaling. And when you journal, if you don't have every element of it written in there appropriately, and in some of them we were journaling on schools, and so an item that was on the wrong date got put into there, and so we had to move some things around at the end. That's pretty normal in the journaling process there. And if you're going to journal back to salary, it becomes even more challenging when you have time accounting, because individuals didn't necessarily know they were supposed to be doing time accounting, even though they were doing compliant work. And so a lot of our work is about duty statements, making sure that they're clean on the front end so that it's very easy to do time accounting. And that's also why in the previous presentation a couple meetings ago, we talked about getting all those people out of Title III because of the time accounting was too difficult and you had to reconcile every month. We had the same issue with bond funded individuals that Sanjay has to actually make an adjustment to their salary every single month if they don't have that exact time accounting. So we're trying to avoid split funded people. We're trying to avoid those pieces. and then fall back on the duty statements. But that requires journaling, and that requires both Michael and Monique to remind us to have the right process all the way through. So it's a good checks and balances.
Okay. As a point of order, can we extend for, how much time do we need? 7 minutes or?
Yeah, because I don't think you really need anything on the parcel tax because it's an unmodified opinion and there's no findings.
There are no findings on that at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I looked at it. I didn't see anything. Okay.
Trustee Reckler,
Yes, sir.
I move that we extend the meeting until midnight.
No. You. No.
I'm sorry, I had to be a butt. How much time do you need?
I think we need 5 minutes. That's it. Because you're going to
5
ask
minutes.
questions. We're going to do public comment.
Do
and
10
then,
minutes and be done at 5:10. Hard stop.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. I've been waiting all day to say that.
yeah, I'm
Uh,
sure.
But
I know,
I
because the
moved,
more time we give, then it's like we use it all. So I'm like, no.
I'm gonna talk about everything I can think of for
I
the
know.
next 8 hours. But I moved 10 minutes.
Okay, I will second that. So 5:10, and then I have a birthday party that I didn't get to go to on Wednesday, so we're gonna have a party for my husband. So,
Very good.
any questions on this? None. Okay.
So what will happen is we have to bring all of the audits to be received by the board. So the facilities committee has seen several audits. You've now seen several. Also attached to here is the MDAC report, the MRAD report, which is the Maintenance and Recreation District. Also attached is the OPEB actuarial report. We stacked them all. We have all of the mandated reporting pieces that were delayed due to COVID. We're kind of put together here, but this was the most important piece, was that we got through the audit. We had a couple of findings. The one that I also we didn't ask about, but I wanted to make sure you kind of heard, was that reclassified student. This is actually a big deal. We reclassified a student 2 years ago, but they did not get coded correctly in Power School, our student information system. So when we report our unduplicated count students, they were still being credited as an English learner. That meant that they go into our supplemental and concentration grant funds.
Yeah,
but
I
the
saw that.
underlying issue there is the approach and focus on student data. We had that same issue as part of our immunization conversation earlier this year. We had that same issue as part of our focus on needing to do lunch form applications and student forms. So it has become evident that we don't have the proper controls over
No
that.
kidding.
So there will be a recommendation coming to put some oversight over that with positional control and authority to make sure that that doesn't keep happening, because it's happened in too many areas. And I want to front load that to this committee, that there's a couple areas that are gaps that we found structurally in the organization, that when we removed the executive directors, when we did a couple things, have created significant risk to the district, that as part of our entire next year's package, there's about 4 or 5 areas in functional positions that we're going to be strongly moving to bring forward. They're within, we've already planned for them in the budget for next year going forward. And so I wanted to point that one out. The focus on human beings, we're struggling with, as you can see, just getting people into classrooms right now and getting all the people back. We're too short on the HR side. And then the principal support supervision. Those are 3 big areas that we left chasms in. Had we been in person all year, they would have been exposed.
Yeah, so I don't want to speak for President
Yeah.
Phillips, but I know that we have had some conversations about that, and we are, we are cut into the bone, and it is absolutely affecting performance. And I am keenly aware of that. And once again, I don't want to speak for President Phillips, but we've had a couple of conversations about that. And we absolutely realize that. I think I think some of this can be automated too. So when you fill out, there needs to be a stopgap somewhere for free and reduced lunch forms. No matter who you are, if you're me, if anyone, there needs to be a process where you fill it out, no matter who you are. Where we are collecting 28,000 forms a year.
Yep.
And then on the immunizations, this is a different discussion, but we need to be doing that at every school. So we need a van to come up. We need the kids to have permission. We need to own that, and it's outside our purview, but it affects us.
Well, we have a partnership now. Safeway will come to us.
Yeah, so they
So
have to. They have to.
we have an option.
Yeah, it's not even optional. So.
Yeah. So I just wanted to
We have
front
to
load
own
that
We know.
sometimes audits actually present the whole issue, and it allows us to look at our entire organization. And that's why findings are not a bad thing. They expose what we need to focus on.
Yeah, I'm not against the findings at all. I just want to know how to manage those and how you guys are gonna, address them, and then what your timing is to present a new plan and to, make improvement. I do have a question, if I can, on the parcel tax, and it really comes back to the charter schools, which is, are we getting what we need?
You're talking about data?
Data,
Oh.
yeah, for reporting, decent reporting.
They're doing a much better job. Denise has created a good interactive relationship with them to make sure that we do get that information we need. And through the charter committee, we're also going to continue to start holding them a little more accountable to their pieces. So I think we are.
Yeah, and we haven't gotten to that in the charter school committee, but I certainly have some recommendations on how that process should work. I don't know how it works, but I went to one of those meetings and I was like, oh, I think we're missing a few things here. So, okay. All right. So that's good. That's really all I have on that. President Phillips, anything else?
No.
Public comment. Oh, do we do public comment? We did it. There was none, right?
Yep, none.
Okay.
So that is it. The other two items were just for you to receive those reports.
Yeah, and I'm going to read those. I may have questions on those just for, those are things that don't really get the light of day ever, and they actually are important. So I may want to bring them back just as an explanation of what these things are and these little pots of money that we collect along the way.
We'd be glad to do that, to bring back a presentation to explain the parcel, explain grants, explain the MRAD, and how they interact as part of our operational budget. It would honestly be part of a good, how do we get our money presentation, again, to show the pieces. Just for transparency, my intent is to put all of this to be received on consent for the next board meeting, just so that they've been received.
Yeah, and I may have questions. I mean, it's just so much information. It takes some time to really dig through the stuff, and it's not, these are not graphic novels. This is some dense.
It is, and it's tough, and unfortunately we're also running out of board meetings to get all of these required compliance items done.
Yeah, so that's fine. I'm okay with it being on consent. I may pull a few things to say this, and this is how it's going to be rectified, but I think we're okay on that. Okay, anything else? I need to go to a birthday party.
Regina?
If I may, Trustee Reckler,
Yes,
I just
of
wanted
course.
to take a few seconds to say thank you to Monique Manzo and Michael Ash. All of the work and support that they provide our staff in the business office and our district was tremendous as well. They thanked us for all of our support giving them, but they gave us tremendous support and tremendous patience We have a lot of staff and some took a little bit longer in providing some of that support, including myself. And they were just so gracious and so patient. So I just wanted to say thank you very, very much. It's always a pleasure working with you guys, and you have always been just available whenever we have questions, whenever I need to pick up the phone and call or email you. So it's a mutual respect, and thank you very much for everything that you guys do for us as well. I appreciate it.
That is so nice to hear. I love these partnerships. That's great. Good. That's the way it should be. Thank you. Thank you to our auditors. And anything else on that? President Phillips, any closing remarks?
Yes, I have a speech, and I'm being a butt. No, I don't have anything to say. Have fun at your party.
I know. Our next meeting will be Friday, May 21st, 2021. And with that, I'm going to put on my birthday hat and make up for my Wednesday's absence.
You know, I do have one thing I want to say really quickly. Dr. Wold, Weber, and then everybody who Vega, Romo, Payne, and then I know that there are a couple of people who are were in the audience. Everybody who is staff, I know that you guys are doing a lot right now around trying to get schools open on Monday, and that everybody has their own little different piece. But I want to say thank you so much. I know that this is not what everybody's not getting exactly what they want, and so there are some people who are upset or whatnot. But one of the things that I look forward to about this is that some kids who really need to be in the space are going to be able to be back. And I think that, you know, for good reason too, that we've kind of stuck, you know, as an org around reopening and the safety and all that stuff. And I really think that this is going to help grease the wheels to get things turning again, right? And so I just want to say I appreciate all of you. And I know I can be a little rough sometimes, but I'm thankful and I'm grateful and I appreciate everything that everybody is doing to get these kids back in school, because these kids that are going to come back right now, it's only the beginning, right? But we got to get, you know, the wheels going again, and I think that this is going to do it. So really, thank you for blessing these babies. Thank you for blessing our community, because the truth of the matter is, you guys, with staff, at all the different levels, you guys are the ones, the hard work is happening now, you know, and so I just want to say I appreciate you. And that's all I had to say. Trustee Reckler.
I just want to add one thing. Every one of them that you just see here are going to be at a school site Monday morning, just as an extra body to help out, to say hello, to welcome some kids back. So the business office is emptying itself to be part of the academic team out there at a school site, all the way down to Veronica, who's hiding behind there. She's going to Collins and going to be the person there. So we're all going to be out. So Sanjay, Ellen, Melissa, Margarita, Regina, Veronica, myself. And by the way, you notice it's all female, the whole team there for Trustee Reckler there. We're continuing to bring forward that piece, and we'll all be out at schools. I'll be over at Hercules.
God bless all of you. God bless all of you.
In it together.
And I'll be at Madera or Mira Vista.
And I also will say that Michael, Ash, and I have been talking quite a bit about AB 86, and he won't give me the nod, but he's helped me quite a bit with the documentation we're going to need to be compliant. And we both agree we have absolutely met the spirit of what it is. Now we just got to deliver the full execution, but
thank you,
we
Mr.
think we're gonna have it together.
Michael, where do you live? Are you close? We have a school for you on Monday.
You know, I live in San Diego, but I wish I could get up there. I really miss coming up to the Bay Area. I used to live up there. I used to spend so much time in Northern California. So
It might
never
be
know.
worth Might be worth it to fly him up on Southwest on Monday.
Yeah. I'm trying to talk my daughter into coming
But
in
he's like,
and doing a hub too. So I almost got her convinced that she can finish school in a couple weeks and do a hub for 4 weeks. So we'll see.
Okay, well, everybody rest up. Monday's our big day.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you,
right,
everybody.
thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend. Bye.
And we are adjourned.